If you fail and he reaches the island, you will find death at my hands. Now go!
Well, hello. Today I would like to talk about one unresolved aspect of the plot in Prince of Persia Warrior Within, and technically the last one part of trilogy to Thrones, which may remain a mystery until the end of time. But it's a very interesting topic, at least for those who appreciate the story of these games. You see, when I was a child, I perceived the Empress of Time as a purely positive character, with a few minor negative traits. However, I believe that all of her bad actions were driven by a hopeless situation. But since growing up and studying the plot in detail, I realized that things are not as simple as they seem to me at first glance. Let's start with a question that constantly troubled me during the game, especially when I played it first. It's about the origin of all the creatures on the Island of Time except for the Empress herself and Shadi. There are two possible explanations for who created the monsters. Either the Empress of Time created them, or the Sands themselves did it. My main question was why they are so evil and aggressive. If the Empress is supposed to be a positive character in this game, after all, the good ending with her rescue is considered the canonical ending. But problem is that she didn't do anything to help us, to protect herself. In fact, she only hindered us. But okay, let's just assume she is a positive character. We don't have official explanation from developers, but I think that was something like that. The Island of Time itself is the creation of a higher powers in this world, which chose this area and turned all the people and animals into sand monsters who became Kaileena slaves. In fact, the Empress herself created the Sands of Time, which as we saw destroy all life, turning it into something like sand zombies. In my opinion, this was done not so much for protection, but for the conquest of the world, or at least as a punishment for humanity. This seems to be an evil force that might be hiding behind the nature of the princess, and we can indirectly see this through the symbolism in the game and her behavior. Either the Empress of Time enslaved the island herself, or created her monsters and fauna from scratch. Either way, she doesn't seem like a benevolent creation at all, because they're terrifying, they look very ridiculous and aggressive, like they prepared to attack someone. And you can tell that it was created for protection, but it's not looks like a noble knights, all angels, or something like that. It looks really aggressive and terrifying, and the way it is. But as we already understood from the plot, I've never seen sand warriors being created out of nothing. It seems like this matter needs living flesh to build from. This reminds me a bit of the Necromorphs from Dead Space. They are, of course, much more developed than the plot of the entire trilogy, but the point is that I am 90% sure the princess simply took control of the island with her powers, or the very force of the sense of time, turned this area into a dead and green place. This already says a lot about the nature and origin of our Kaileena. Although many creatures gladly serve her and carry out her will literally, nothing can be said about their progenitors, from whom they were created. But everything changed when I learned an important fact about the development of the game. Initially, Kaileena was intended to be the main antagonist with the Haka under her command. This was discovered by fans of the game from another thematic channel dedicated to Prince of Persia. This explains why the monsters look so terrifying and clearly seems to have been created to expand and maintain her powers rather than for protection. Like, for example, noble knights, which these creatures don't look like, obviously. Moreover, in the CUT content, there were more terrifying creatures than those who already encountered. If we take an objective look at Kaileena character, we can see that she is absolutely selfish and arrogant. For example, while the prince wants to defy his fate out of a thirst for life, the Empress is driven more by fear and the desire to preserve her power. She originally lies to the hero, even though she saw her fate in the science fall and knew that resisting was pointless. Moreover, she doesn't even take a couple of minutes to listen to the prince, immediately rushing into battle, or lying, or manipulating, or trying to kill him our ways. And what I can talk about Shaudi, although she doesn't play some huge role in the story, earns much more respect from me cause she behaves more wisely, unlike Kaileena, who is so hysterical that she can't even try to understand the situation and attempts to kill the prince at every opportunity she has, without trying to have a dialogue with him, without trying to resolve it for them both. Even during my first playthrough, this seems very foolish and egoistic for me. I think the most significant symbolism lies in the canonical ending, which proves my point. When we see the bad scene with our Persian friend and the Empress of Time, she is at one point positioned behind him, meaning in a dominant position. In fact, many consider this is a mistake as it looks strange and even funny, but perhaps the developers were trying to show us the selfish, true, and power-hungry nature of the Empress in this strange way, because they was hesitate. Uh, Her desire to keep the prince under control and seize all the power over Babylon, just as she tried to control the entire time itself, and her subordinates like Shadi, other creatures on the island, forcing them to go against the natural order, which ultimately leads to the Shadi's rebellion. I think we could have initially gotten an entirely different story in the second part, or at least a continuation in the third one, with the Empress of Time betrayal at the end instead of the Dark Prince. However, as you all know, the abrupt change in gameplay style and the rush in development lead to widespread fan dissatisfaction. This ultimately resulted in the demise of the entire series. What do you think about this? How do you feel about the characters of Kaileena and Shadi? And who do you relate more? You can write down comments about it if you want. So goodbye, thanks for watching.